to your news on Newshorn TV. I am Lido Koza and these are your top stories. Some European nations are going to wake up to new freedoms as lockdown restrictions are eased.
After 2 months of a lockdown in Italy, parks and public spaces will now reopen their gates. It's the start of a gradual easing of the tight restrictions which saw the country hard hit by COVID-19. The mayor of Turin says there's extra public transport for an expected 80,000 people heading to work.
The means of public transport are sanitised. There are all the procedures that guarantee safety. There'll be signage showing how to get on and how to get off, and signage that enables people to stay 1 metre away from one another. Also, starting on Monday, it's compulsory to wear a face mask on public transport. If you don't have one, they'll be distributed by the region to all residents to be taken on board.
Meanwhile, in Spain, it counted the lowest daily number since the start, with 164 deaths on Sunday. The country had one of the strictest measures, and since the weekend, Spaniards have been allowed outside to exercise or go for a walk with different times for different age groups. In France, Paris police have issued 64,000 violation tickets since the beginning of the lockdown. New measures will be announced this week as the death toll continues to drop. But from the 11th of May, masks will have to be worn on public transport and shops are scheduled to reopen. The UK is fast reaching Italy's fatality figures and could soon surpass Europe's worst hit country as the total number of deaths has now reached more than 28,000. This week, the government will set out plans of how the country will get back to work, with more public transport and possible staggered work times. Meanwhile, Russia has seen a sharp increase of new virus cases, with more than 10,000 confirmed on Sunday. More than half of those were in Moscow. But officials say the increased figure is because of the rise in the number of tests. Louise Miner, Euronews.
And on other news, gunmen kill about 20 people in several villages in Niger. These people also looted shops and stole cattle. They also told villagers, or rather ordered villagers to flee.
20 people or even more have been killed in attacks by gunmen on several villages in Niger, local authorities say. Governor of Tillaberi region Tijani Ibrahim Katiela said the assailants were riding motorbikes during the incidents on Saturday. The unidentified group reportedly looted shops, stole cattle and ordered village inhabitants to flee. Since 2017, a state of emergency has been in place in Tillaberi. It borders Mali, Burkina Faso and Benin. Eyewitnesses told local media that the latest attacks took place at about 1600 local time, 1500 Greenwich Mean Time. Gunmen targeted villages including Gadabo and Koira Taguio. Militants affiliated to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda continue to operate in the region, weakening control by national governments. Attacks by these groups have killed 170 government soldiers since December last year. Last week, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, warned that jihadist groups in the Sahel were exploiting the coronavirus pandemic to step up attacks. Combating militants in the region is seen as important for maintaining security further afield, including Europe. Several African and European countries, along with the US, have set up a military task force to deal with the insurgency. The UN also has a 13,000-strong peacekeeping force in Mali, which has been targeted by insurgent groups. On Sunday, 3 Chadian peacekeepers were killed by a roadside bomb. No group has claimed responsibility for the deaths, but such explosives are a preferred tactic of jihadists in the area. Source: BBC News.
To try and combat the spread of COVID-19, the government in India has released the prisoners on the 31st of March, that is, and some of the prisoners couldn't make it home because of the lockdown restrictions. Arid, who is 32 years old, as part of the prisoners who are 22,000 who have been released in prison, basically he's one who cannot get himself home.
the freed prisoner who's unable to return home. When Arif was released from a prison in Western India on the 31st of March, he longed to return home quickly, but over the next fortnight he was hounded out 3 times in 2 cities from his own home and then that of a fellow inmate before landing up in a shelter for homeless. He fled, trying to return home again, and is now quarantined in a friend's house. The 32-year-old lanky man who drove taxis for a living had been held in Taloja prison in the western state of Maharashtra for 6 months without trial for allegedly stealing a mobile phone. He was eligible for bail, but his family couldn't rustle up the 15,000 rupees, so he languished in jail. The release of men and women like Arif came after the Supreme Court asked states to free inmates in India's notoriously overcrowded prisons to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The judges said that convicted prisoners who are serving sentences of up to 7 years or less could be freed. Also, those still under trial could be still considered for release. Freeing prisoners during the lockdown has not been easy. Many are not being able to return home. Inside the prisons, anxiety and isolation is rising among inmates. Many have rioted demanding to be released. Non-profits are asking governments to release sick inmates. Although the top court wants to decongest the prisons, people are still being arrested and are thrown into jail for defying the lockdown and other charges.
And on other news, Shady Habash, a filmmaker in Egypt who was detained for making a music video mocking the president, has died in prison, and it is said that he died of alcohol poisoning. Rock and roll star Little Richard has died at age 87 years. His family announced he dies of bone cancer in Tennessee.
Here's that real solid man of rock and roll, Little Richard.
Proof that Little Richard was one of the founding fathers of rock and roll is the fact that one of the acts that opened for him was the Beatles back in Hamburg, Germany. The Fab Four undiscovered. Little Richard already a big star.
Good golly, Miss Molly!
Hits like Good Golly Miss Molly and Lucille. Little Richard helped R&B cross over and create rock and roll. Pat Boone helped too.
I got a gal, her name's Sue. She knows just what to do.
Boone made Tutti Frutti the bigger hit, but the original
I got a gal named Sue. She knows just what to do.
that belonged to Richard Penniman, who wrote it washing dishes at the Greyhound bus station in Macon, Georgia.
He saw Mary coming and he ducked back in the alley.
Little Richard, quietly gay under that haircut in the Eisenhower era, an inspiration to Elton John, Freddie Mercury, and others. David Wright, ABC News, New York.
Now, former President Barack Obama has criticized now President Donald Trump for him, or rather over his handling of the COVID-19 crisis. He says that the way the government is handling the pandemic is a chaotic crisis.
There's been an absolute chaotic disaster when that mindset of what's in it for me and to heck with everybody else, when that mindset is operationalized in our government.
In response to those comments, Donald Trump in a tweet touted his decision to close down travel from China in the early days of COVID-19, the president's go-to defense of his handling of the global crisis. He added, compare that to the Obama Sleepy Joe disaster known as H1N1 swine flu. Poor Mark's bad polls didn't have a clue.
We are done.
Obama's criticism is some of the harshest yet from the former president about the White House's actions, and comes at a time when the government is really encouraging states to reopen, even as the deadly virus continues to spread. But Obama didn't stop there. He also took aim at the Justice Department for dropping its criminal case against fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI.
There is no precedent that anybody can find for someone who's been charged with perjury just getting off scot-free. You begin to get worried that our basic understanding of rule of law is at risk.
The call was intended to encourage Obama alumni to rally behind former Vice President Joe Biden's presidential campaign.
I am hoping that all of you feel the same sense of urgency that I do.
A 25-year-old Sylvia Romano returns to her home after she had been abducted in 2018 in Kenya. She was greeted by her mother and her sister, as well as the Foreign Affairs Minister at the airport.
Sta andando via l'aereo. Vai. Luce, è l'ordinanza questa. Personalmente abbiamo detto l'Italia.
Saudi Arabia State News announced that the value-added tax in Saudi Arabia will increase from 5% to 15% as from the 1st of July.
Saudi Arabia's finance minister on Monday said the kingdom will triple its value-added tax, VAT, and halt monthly handout payments to citizens in new austerity measures amid the coronavirus-led economic slump. It has been decided the cost of living allowance will be halted from June 2020 and VAT will be raised from 5% to 15% from July 1. Minister Mohammed Al-Jadaan said, according to the official Saudi press agency. The measures come after Jadaan last week warned of painful and drastic steps as the government steps up emergency plans to slash spending amid the double shock of the novel coronavirus and record low oil prices. Saudi Arabia, along with other Gulf states, imposed a 5% tax on goods and services in 2018 in a bid to generate additional revenue. The petrostate had also introduced handouts worth billions of dollars to citizens, known as the cost of living allowance, to cushion the impact of rising costs. Jadaan has said he expected Riyadh could lose half of its oil income, which contributes about 70% of public revenues, as oil prices have fallen 2/3 since the start of the year. He said the world's leading crude exporter would borrow close to $60 billion this year to plug a huge budget deficit. The International Monetary Fund in April projected that the Saudi economy would contract by 2.3% this year.
The National Airline of Colombia has filed for bankruptcy protection in the U.S. court. Now, in a virtual meeting held with the heads of state, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that he believes that in order for the African nations or African countries to actually strive, or rather be able to cope after COVID-19, as if they are debt-free, or rather at a debt standstill for at least 2 years.
Asia to Europe, North and South America, Africa and island nations. The goal is the same: to protect lives and economies. Leaders have to make tough decisions. The AU says international institutions must show empathy.
We have also appointed 5 African Union COVID-19 special envoys to follow up on the pledges, as well as to mobilize further international support and campaign for international participation. And these envoys that we've appointed are Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala of Nigeria, and Dr. Kaberuka of Rwanda, Mr. Thiam of Cote d'Ivoire, Trevor Manuel of South Africa, and Mr. Abderrahmane of Algeria. So they are the special envoys that we appointed, who are now scouring the world and campaigning for funding.
IMF and the World Bank loans have always been a thorny issue.
We've addressed the virtual summit of the G20 and a virtual joint meeting of the World Bank and the IMF, where we called for, among others, the allocation of more special drawing rights, allocations to Africa, and to provide much needed liquidity to central banks. But we also took time in those engagements to call for the lifting of sanctions against Zimbabwe and Sudan. We also urged for a waiver of all interest payments, as well as the multilateral, as well as bilateral debt, and this would provide the necessary fiscal space for African governments. In general, the response from the international community has been positive, with various partners making pledges, offering debt relief measures, and providing concrete support in the form of medical supplies.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Lindo Koza. Stay tuned for your political news with Bashe Mashaya.